Every day, millions of families open the refrigerator, take out yesterday's dinner, warm it up for a few minutes, and assume they're making a perfectly safe choice. It's quick, convenient, and feels like the responsible thing to do. After all, why waste perfectly good food? But what if reheating isn't always as harmless as we've been led to believe? Not because your microwave is dangerous, not because leftovers are automatically unhealthy, but because certain foods can undergo subtle chemical changes after they've been cooked, stored, and heated a second time. These changes don't make your food look different. They usually don't change the smell, the taste, or the texture enough for you to notice. Yet in some cases, they may alter the compounds inside your meal in ways that researchers have been studying for decades. I'm Dr. James Carter. For many years, I've focused on nutritional science, healthy aging, and how everyday cooking habits influence long-term health. One thing I've learned is that some of the biggest health risks aren't dramatic at all. They often come from small routines we repeat every single day without giving them a second thought. Today's video isn't about creating fear around food. It's about helping you understand why a few simple changes in the way you store and reheat certain meals may be worth considering, especially if you're trying to protect your health as you get older. By the end of this video, you'll know 4 everyday foods that deserve extra attention after they've been refrigerated. Some of them might already be sitting in your kitchen right now. And I have to tell you, the 4th food surprises almost everyone. Most people consider it one of the healthiest foods they can eat. Doctors recommend it. Nutrition experts recommend it. Chances are, you probably eat it several times a week. Yet very few people ever think about what happens when it's repeatedly reheated. We'll also discuss simple habits that can help reduce unnecessary exposure to unwanted compounds without forcing you to completely change the foods you enjoy. Because this isn't about avoiding healthy foods. It's about understanding how preparation, storage, and reheating can sometimes matter just as much as the food itself. One important thing before we continue: cancer, heart disease, and many chronic illnesses don't usually develop because of one meal or one mistake. They are influenced by countless factors that accumulate over many years, including genetics, lifestyle, exercise, sleep, smoking, alcohol, body weight, and diet. Food alone doesn't determine your future. However, nutrition is one of the few factors you can improve every single day, one meal at a time. That's exactly why scientists continue studying how cooking methods affect the chemistry of food. They aren't trying to convince people to stop eating everyday meals. They're trying to understand how small adjustments may help reduce long-term health risks while preserving the nutritional benefits of those foods. Today we'll explore what that research has discovered. But before we examine the first food, you need to understand one simple principle that explains why reheating isn't always the same as cooking something fresh for the first time. Once you understand this concept, everything else in today's video will make much more sense. Let's begin with a question that sounds simple. If heat kills bacteria, shouldn't reheating food make it even safer? The answer is not always. Cooking fresh food for the first time and reheating leftovers are two very different situations. When you cook a fresh meal, the ingredients are relatively stable. Proteins are intact, fats haven't been exposed to oxygen for long, and naturally occurring compounds inside the food haven't had much time to change. But once that meal cools down and spends hours, or sometimes days, in the refrigerator, a completely different process begins. Even in cold temperatures, food doesn't remain chemically frozen in time. Very slow reactions continue to occur. Oxygen interacts with fats. Proteins gradually change their structure. Naturally occurring bacteria that survive normal cooking may continue producing byproducts under certain conditions if food isn't cooled and stored properly. Then comes the second round of heat. Instead of simply warming the food, reheating may continue some of those chemical reactions that already started during storage. Think of it like repeatedly bending a paperclip. One bend doesn't usually break it, but each additional bend changes the metal a little more until it eventually weakens. Food chemistry can behave in a surprisingly similar way. Scientists generally focus on 3 major processes when studying repeatedly heated foods. The first is oxidation. This happens when fats and certain nutrients react with oxygen over time. Additional heat can accelerate that process, creating compounds researchers continue to investigate for their effects on human health. The second involves proteins. Repeated exposure to high temperatures can gradually change the structure of proteins and produce new substances that weren't present when the meal was first cooked. The third process involves certain naturally occurring compounds found in specific vegetables. After storage, these compounds may be converted into different forms, and under the right conditions, additional heating may encourage further chemical reactions. Now, this doesn't mean every reheated meal suddenly becomes dangerous. Far from it. Many leftovers remain perfectly enjoyable when they're cooled quickly, stored correctly, and reheated appropriately. The important message is much more practical than that. Different foods respond differently to storage and heat. Some remain remarkably stable. Others deserve a little more attention. Knowing which is which allows you to make smarter decisions without adding stress to your daily routine. Over the next few minutes, we'll look at 4 foods that scientists have studied closely, beginning with one of the most common leftovers found in refrigerators around the world. It's inexpensive. It's comforting. Billions of people eat it every single day. Yet very few realize that what happens after it's cooked may matter just as much as the cooking itself. Let's start with one of the most common foods on the planet: rice. For billions of people, rice isn't just another side dish, it's the foundation of nearly every meal. It's affordable, filling, easy to prepare in large batches, and incredibly convenient to save for later. That's exactly why leftover rice often ends up back in the microwave the next day. The interesting part isn't the reheating itself, it's everything that happens between the first meal and the second. When freshly cooked rice begins to cool, it can become a favorable environment for certain naturally occurring bacteria if it sits out too long before refrigeration. One of the best-known examples is Bacillus cereus, a microorganism commonly found in uncooked rice. Proper cooking destroys the active bacteria, but some spores can survive. If cooked rice remains at room temperature for an extended period, those spores may multiply and produce toxins before the rice is refrigerated. Here's what surprises many people. Heating the rice again may destroy the bacteria, but some toxins are remarkably heat-resistant. Once they've formed, simply reheating the rice doesn't necessarily remove them. This is why food safety experts consistently emphasize that how quickly rice is cooled after cooking is just as important as how thoroughly it's reheated later. There's another reason researchers continue studying repeatedly heated rice. Repeated exposure to high heat can encourage the formation of compounds such as acrylamide under certain cooking conditions, particularly when starchy foods are subjected to intense heat multiple times. Scientists continue investigating how long-term dietary exposure to these compounds may influence overall health. Does that mean you should stop eating rice? Absolutely not. Rice can still be part of a healthy diet. The smarter approach is surprisingly simple. After cooking, allow the rice to cool quickly, rather than leaving it on the counter for hours. Store it in shallow containers so the temperature drops faster. Refrigerate it promptly, and try to enjoy it within a day. If you reheat it once, avoid reheating the same portion again. Those small habits can make a meaningful difference over time. Now let's move to another food that almost everyone considers one of the healthiest proteins available: chicken. Whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, or simply eat healthier, chicken usually appears near the top of the list. It's lean, versatile, and recommended in countless meal plans. That's also why millions of people prepare several days' worth of chicken at once and reheat it throughout the week. Meal preparation itself isn't the problem. The concern is how proteins respond to repeated exposure to high temperatures. When cooked chicken is heated again, especially at very high temperatures, its proteins and fats continue undergoing chemical changes. Scientists have identified compounds called heterocyclic amines, or HCAs, which can form when animal proteins are exposed to intense heat. Researchers have spent decades studying these compounds because laboratory experiments suggest they can interact with DNA after being metabolized in the body. While cancer development is always influenced by many different factors, this is one reason experts encourage avoiding unnecessary overcooking whenever possible. There's another issue that receives less attention. Repeated heating also accelerates fat oxidation. As fats break down, they produce additional oxidation byproducts that researchers continue investigating for their potential role in chronic inflammation and cellular stress. Fortunately, reducing these changes doesn't require giving up chicken altogether. Instead of blasting leftovers on the highest microwave setting, use gentler heat whenever practical. Reheat only the portion you plan to eat, avoid repeatedly warming the same container, and consider enjoying leftover chicken cold in salads, wraps, or sandwiches when appropriate. 2 foods: Two different scientific mechanisms, yet both point toward the same lesson. It's often not the food itself that deserves closer attention. It's the way we handle it after cooking. And the next food may be even more surprising because it's widely celebrated as one of the healthiest vegetables you can put on your plate. Yet after spending a night in the refrigerator, it can undergo changes that very few people ever hear about. If I asked you to name one of the healthiest vegetables in your refrigerator, spinach would probably be near the top of the list. And honestly, for good reason. Spinach is packed with vitamins, minerals, fiber, and natural antioxidants. It's an excellent source of folate, vitamin K, magnesium, and plant compounds that support everything from bone health to normal blood vessel function. Nutrition professionals have recommended leafy greens for decades because they're consistently associated with healthier dietary patterns. So let me be very clear. Nothing we're discussing today means spinach is unhealthy. In fact, eating fresh spinach, or spinach that's cooked and enjoyed right away, can absolutely be part of a balanced diet. The question isn't whether spinach is good for you. The question is, what can happen after it's been cooked, stored for an extended period, and then heated again? This comes down to naturally occurring nitrates. Many leafy vegetables, including spinach, celery, Swiss chard, and beet greens, naturally contain relatively high levels of nitrate. In their original form, these compounds aren't considered harmful. In fact, research suggests they may even contribute to healthy blood flow and support normal cardiovascular function. The chemistry begins to change after storage. As cooked spinach sits in the refrigerator, naturally occurring bacteria can gradually convert some of those nitrates into nitrites. This is a slow process, but it's one scientists have understood for many years. When that stored spinach is later reheated, especially at higher temperatures, the conditions become more favorable for additional chemical reactions. Under certain circumstances, nitrites may contribute to the formation of compounds called nitrosamines. You've probably heard that name before in discussions about processed meats. That's because nitrosamines have been studied extensively for decades, and some forms have been associated with an increased cancer risk in laboratory and epidemiological research. Scientists continue investigating exactly how dietary exposure contributes to long-term health, but the evidence has been strong enough for health authorities to recommend minimizing unnecessary exposure whenever practical. Here's the important takeaway. The concern isn't that spinach suddenly becomes dangerous overnight. It's that repeated heating after storage may create conditions that are less desirable than simply eating the vegetable fresh or enjoying the leftovers without reheating. Fortunately, the solution is incredibly simple. If you're preparing spinach for dinner, try to cook only the amount you'll actually eat. If you do have leftovers, cool them promptly, store them properly, and consider using them cold in a salad, grain bowl, or wrap instead of putting them back into the microwave. It's a small adjustment that preserves convenience while reducing unnecessary reheating. More importantly, it reminds us of something we've seen with every food so far. Healthy food doesn't automatically stay chemically identical after it's been cooked, stored, and heated again. Preparation matters, storage matters, temperature matters, and the final food on today's list brings all three of those ideas together. In fact, it's one of the most nutritionally complete foods available, recommended by physicians, fitness experts, and dietitians alike. Yet very few people realize that repeated heating may gradually change some of its most valuable nutrients. If you've been assuming this food is always safe to warm up again without a second thought, the next section may completely change the way you prepare breakfast. Now we've reached the food I mentioned at the very beginning, the one that surprises almost everyone. Eggs. If you've watched this channel for a while, you already know that I'm a strong supporter of eggs as part of a balanced diet. They're one of the few foods that naturally provide high-quality protein, along with a wide range of essential nutrients in a relatively small serving. Eggs contain all 9 essential amino acids, making them a complete protein. They're also rich in choline, an important nutrient that supports brain function, along with lutein and zeaxanthin, antioxidants that help protect healthy vision as we age. Add in selenium, vitamin B12, and several other micronutrients. And it's easy to understand why eggs have earned such a strong reputation among nutrition professionals. So once again, let's separate the food from the habit. Eggs are not the problem. The question is whether repeatedly heating cooked eggs is the best way to enjoy them. When eggs are cooked for the first time, their proteins naturally unfold and solidify. This is a completely normal part of cooking. At the same time, The fats and cholesterol found primarily in the yolk are exposed to heat for the first time. Once those cooked eggs are refrigerated, slow oxidative processes continue to occur. They're much slower than during cooking, but they don't stop entirely. When the eggs are heated again, especially using high temperatures or uneven heating in a microwave, those already altered fats may continue breaking down. Researchers have spent years studying compounds that form during this process, particularly oxidized cholesterol derivatives known as oxysterols. These compounds have attracted scientific attention because laboratory studies suggest they may contribute to oxidative stress and inflammation inside the body. It's important to keep this in perspective. Finding these compounds in laboratory research does not mean eating reheated eggs automatically causes disease. Human health depends on countless factors working together over many years. However, one consistent message appears throughout nutrition research. Minimizing unnecessary oxidation is generally considered a positive step for long-term health. The proteins inside eggs can also continue changing during repeated heating. If you've ever reheated scrambled eggs until they became rubbery, dry, or slightly chewy, you've already seen evidence of those structural changes. Excessive heat doesn't just affect texture, it may also reduce the overall quality of the protein and encourage additional chemical reactions that scientists continue to investigate. Fortunately, this is one of the easiest problems to avoid. If you're making eggs for breakfast, prepare only what you expect to eat that morning, whenever possible. If you boil eggs ahead of time, leave the shells on during storage and enjoy them cold as a quick snack or sliced over a salad. Hard-boiled eggs hold up much better than scrambled eggs when refrigerated. If you do choose to warm an egg-based dish, use gentle heat rather than cooking it a second time. The goal is simply to warm the food, not to expose it to another round of intense cooking. Now, take a step back and look at the bigger picture. We've examined rice, we've looked at chicken, we've talked about leafy greens, and now we've finished with eggs. At first glance, these foods seem completely unrelated. One is a grain, one is a lean protein, one is a vegetable, and one is considered one of nature's most complete foods. Yet they all reveal the same lesson. The greatest influence on food isn't always what happens while you're cooking dinner. Sometimes it's what happens afterward, the way food cools, the way it's stored, how long it stays in the refrigerator, and how many times it goes back under heat. In the next section, I'll bring all 4 foods together and show you the simple habits that can dramatically improve the way you store and reheat everyday meals, without making your life more complicated. Now that we've looked at all 4 foods individually, let's step back and focus on the bigger picture. At first glance, rice, chicken, spinach, and eggs don't seem to have much in common. They're prepared differently, contain different nutrients, and serve different roles in a healthy diet. Yet the research surrounding these foods points toward one surprisingly consistent message. The greatest concern isn't usually the food itself. It's the combination of time, temperature, storage, and repeated heating. In other words, the way we handle food after it's cooked may influence its quality just as much as the ingredients we choose in the first place. Think about how leftovers are often treated in a busy household. Dinner finishes. The food stays on the table while everyone talks. Later, it's transferred into one large container. The next day, someone reheats part of it. That evening, the same container goes back into the microwave again. Then perhaps one more time the following day. Each reheating cycle exposes the food to another round of heat. Each cooling period gives additional time for slow chemical changes to continue. Over time, those repeated cycles may gradually alter nutrients, fats, and proteins far more than most people realize. Fortunately, avoiding this pattern doesn't require expensive equipment or complicated meal plans. It simply requires a few smarter habits. The first is cooling food promptly. Instead of leaving large pots or serving dishes sitting at room temperature for hours, divide leftovers into smaller, shallow containers. This allows heat to escape more quickly and helps the food reach refrigeration temperature sooner. The second habit is portioning before storage. Rather than placing an entire batch into one container that will be opened and reheated repeatedly, divide it into individual servings from the beginning. That way, you only warm the portion you're planning to eat, while the rest stays cold and undisturbed. Next comes reheating temperature. Many people assume hotter is always better. In reality, the goal isn't to cook the food again, it's simply to bring it to a safe serving temperature. Gentle, even heating, often preserves texture better, and may reduce unnecessary chemical changes compared with repeatedly exposing food to very high heat. Planning meals more carefully can also make a surprising difference. Preparing enormous batches may seem efficient, but if those meals remain in the refrigerator for several days while being reheated over and over, some of the convenience may come at the expense of food quality. Sometimes cooking slightly smaller portions more frequently is the better long-term strategy. Another practical habit is learning which leftovers don't actually need to be reheated at all. Cold chicken works well in salads. Hard-boiled eggs make an excellent snack. Cooked spinach can be mixed into grain bowls or wraps without returning it to high heat. Not every leftover has to go back into the microwave. These are simple adjustments, not dramatic lifestyle changes. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is making small decisions that gradually improve the quality of your daily diet. Because when it comes to long-term health, consistency almost always matters more than perfection. Before we finish, let's put everything we've discussed into one simple checklist you can remember the next time you're standing in front of your refrigerator wondering what to do with yesterday's leftovers. We've covered a lot of information today, so let's simplify everything into a few practical habits you can start using immediately. First, whenever possible, prepare only the amount of food you realistically expect to eat. Fewer leftovers often mean fewer opportunities for repeated reheating. Second, cool cooked food promptly after the meal instead of leaving it on the counter for extended periods. Using shallow containers can help food cool more efficiently before refrigeration. Third, store leftovers in individual portions whenever you can. Reheating one serving is much better than warming an entire container multiple times over several days. Fourth, avoid reheating the same portion more than once. Every additional heating cycle exposes the food to further chemical changes that are often unnecessary. Fifth, remember that not every leftover needs to be served hot. Some foods, including hard-boiled eggs and cooked chicken, can often be enjoyed cold in the right recipes, reducing the need for another round of heating altogether. And finally, pay attention to how your food is prepared, not just what you're eating. Choosing healthy ingredients is an excellent first step, but storing them properly, handling them safely, and reheating them thoughtfully completes the picture. That's the real message behind today's discussion. This video isn't suggesting that rice, chicken, spinach, or eggs are unhealthy foods. Quite the opposite. All four can absolutely be part of a nutritious diet. The lesson is simply that good nutrition doesn't end when the cooking is finished. The decisions you make afterward matter too. If there's one idea I'd like you to remember, it's this. Healthy eating isn't built on one perfect meal. It's built on hundreds of small choices repeated over months and years. Each one may seem insignificant on its own, but together they create habits that support better health throughout life. Now I'd love to hear from you. Which of today's 4 foods surprised you the most? Was it rice, chicken, spinach, or eggs? Share your answer in the comments below. I read as many of your comments as I can, and your questions often inspire future videos on this channel. If you found today's discussion helpful, consider sharing it with someone in your family or a friend who regularly prepares meals in advance. Sometimes one small piece of information can change a daily habit that lasts for years. And if you're interested in practical, evidence-based nutrition explained in plain English, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. As always, I'd like to end with one important reminder. The information shared in this video is intended for educational purposes and should not replace personalized medical advice. Every person's health history, medications, and nutritional needs are different. If you have concerns about your diet or a medical condition, speak with your physician or a qualified registered dietitian who understands your individual situation. Thank you for spending your time with me today. I'm Dr. James Carter. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love, and I'll see you again in the next video.